Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to be going through n8n automation for voice AI. And this is the first part of a three-part series. Particularly with this part, we are going to be going through the underlying basics when it comes to navigating n8n as a platform, as well as starting to develop and solidify these core concepts when it comes to preparing automations for AI voice applications within n8n. And like I mentioned, we'll be going through mastering the basics in this part, where we're going to be going into some of the foundations like triggers, logic, and data handling for prep when it comes to building in mind of connecting an AI voice agent to these workflows. And we'll also go through, what is n8n as a whole and why it's perfect. And we'll also be going through what is n8n as a whole and why it's perfect for AI voice agents. We'll also understand these core components that I previously mentioned: triggers, data transformation, as well as data output and handling. And in this part, we'll be able to have those core concepts solidified in your mind to build our first workflow with confidence. And why is n8n, I guess why am I making this video, and why this platform in particular is perfect for AI voice agent automation. So n8n as a low-code and developer-friendly platform serves as a perfect fit when it comes to having to build out complex logic flows and automations to suit your voice agent needs. And it's not only this modular low-code platform, but it also offers developers much more experienced with the tools and requirements to build out a lot more complex and nuanced automations. And obviously it offers API integrations, as being the nature of these low-code platforms, to connect to external sources and start to bring together data to really make a sound and application-ready voice agent. And probably the biggest thing here is the fact that a lot of these workflows and automations are reusable, in that we can start to reuse these workflows and plug them into our different voice agents and start to duplicate these and scale our voice agents a lot quicker than if we were to be using traditional methods of logic handling. So without further ado, let's jump into this first part, and we'll be going through all this and building out some cool stuff. So strap in, guys, this will be a big one. So let's get straight into it. So let's get started with setting up n8n. Now, there's two main ways to start using n8n, and the first being cloud-based hosting, where n8n offers you a cloud instance of the platform. The second option is self-hosting, which, if you're a bit more technical, you can set up quite easily using npm or Docker. Now, I won't get into self-hosting in this video. This video will just be using a cloud-based instance. So the first thing you want to do is head over to app.n8n.cloud/register if you don't already have an account. If you have an account, just go ahead and log in. So we can type our details in here, and then we'll jump into the cloud-based instance. Once you've signed up, we can just go ahead and answer these. And you can have the option to invite other team members to your workspace, similar to how make.com operates, in that we can start to invite different team members and assign them different roles. They can jump into our workflows and start helping us automate also. But for now, I'll hit skip. You'll get a pop-up in the right-hand side. Your workspace is now online. And there is a quick start tutorial here that I recommend watching if you're not familiar with how platforms like n8n and make.com operate. So we'll hit start automating, and this will launch our instance of n8n cloud. And here we are in n8n, guys. Very exciting. So we're on a trial account. Obviously, I just signed up then. We'll have an overview here of all the workflows, credentials, and executions we have access to. As you can see here, workflows, credentials, executions, but we've got nothing in our account just at the moment, so we won't see anything. On the left-hand side here, we have n8n. If we hit plus, again, we can go through our workflows, credentials, and also projects here. Projects are located here on the left-hand side, and we can start to add different projects and name them whatever we want, add members to them, and we can also delete projects. And this is what I was saying, where you can assign different roles to different members, obviously down here. We'll go into personal right now, but you can start to add a bunch of different projects where you can segment your workflows and so forth. And under an empty project, we'll see two options here: start from scratch or test a simple AI agent example. On the top right-hand side here, we'll again see create workflow or create credentials or create a folder. Also on the side here, we'll have our admin panel, and this is where everything pertaining to our workspace status, executions, and activity is here. You'll see my workspace is currently online. We can go into the settings here and you'll see the current plan, trial, the version, time zone, and so forth. We can also upgrade plan to have a look at the pricing here. A starter plan is perfect for getting started quickly and seeing the power of n8n. That is €24 a month, and you'll get 2,500 workflow executions as well as 5 active workflows. So when you turn on a workflow, this is considered as active, and this is what this means here. So 5 active workflows, and this includes 1 shared project, unlimited users, forum support, and 1-day workflow history. And we can get into the workflow history and how that works in later. We've got the Pro plan over here at €60 a month, and this is 10,000 workflow executions, 15 active workflows, everything in starter plan, plus we get 3 shared projects, 7 days of insight, admin roles, global variables, and everything like that. Heading back to the dashboard, we can click open to head into our cloud instance here, and we are back to the UI here. We've got templates here also on the side, as well as variables, insights, and help. Templates is all the automation templates that community users had built that you can use freely. We've got things like pulling data, joining different data sets, and dozens and dozens or thousands of templates here that you can start to use if you don't want to build these out yourself. So a very good resource there. Variables here, we can start to add our own variables, and what these are variables which can be used to store data that can be referenced across multiple workflows. So to add a variable, we're using this idea of key value variable pairs. And for instance, if we want to pull a specific variable from our account here, where we can use it in multiple different workflows, we can do that here. So for example, we could say, password and then the value here, whatever it is. And the usage syntax here is how we call upon this specific variable across different workflows. And we'll get into that a bit later. For now, we'll keep that as is. We've got insights also on the side here. And again, this is production executions, failed rate, time saved, run average, and every sort of insight into the operations of your automation workflows. And we also have help here where we have quick starts, some documentation, forums, courses, and so forth. So plenty to go off here just on the side panel here. We'll head back over to personal here and create our first workflow. So for now, I'm going to start from scratch, obviously, and this will bring up our canvas. Now the canvas is where all the magic happens, guys. So we'll want to get very familiar with this. I'm just going to go and X out this top bar here, X out the GitHub over here. And to navigate around the canvas, which is the dotted lines over here, we can use 2 fingers if you're using a trackpad, or to move around, we can hit Command click and grab the screen, or Control click to grab the screen also. We'll have at the top here, editor, and this is where we can start adding our nodes or executions, and this is where we can see our past runs of specific workflows also. On the bottom left down here, we can zoom to fit, where this will recenter our canvas. We can also zoom in or zoom out or clean up our workflow. This aligns everything and sorts everything to look quite nice. On the top right hand side, we have a plus button as well as a sticky note. The plus button is how we open our nodes panel. And we can either click the plus button here or hit tab on your keyboard, and this will open up the nodes section here, where we can start to add different elements and nodes that will facilitate the running of workflows. We can hit tab to exit out again, and over the side here, we can click the sticky notes here, and this adds a bit of a note here that we can title whatever we want. It's in markdown format, and we can drag them around, and maybe we want to tag certain parts of our workflow and so forth, and add little notes that our team members could see and so forth. That's really helpful here. We can also color them, make them whatever color we want, and we can edit, change color, copy, duplicate, tidy up workflow, and so forth. We'll delete that for now. We're going to get into some core concepts here in terms of starting to automate with n8n. And those are triggers, transformations, and handling data output. I'm going to hit tab on my keyboard to pull up what triggers this workflow, and this pulls up when you haven't added a first step. And we've got a variety of different triggers to choose here, including our manual trigger when the workflow is ran by clicking the Run Workflow Execution button itself in n8n. And this is good for just getting started quickly. We've got On App Event here, and if I click into this, you'll see the amount of different apps and platforms and softwares that we can start to integrate with. Action Network, Active Campaign, and really thousands of different nodes that we can start to bring into our n8n Canvas ecosystem here and start to use. And we'll get into using some of these external apps or nodes in a later video. But for now, we're just going to head back and go through the different types of triggers here. The third one is on a schedule. So this works where we want to start or activate the workflow on every day, hour, or at any custom interval that we specify. And this is really helpful for when specific automations have to be ran at certain times of the day, or periodically every 30 minutes, or everything like that. Next, we've got on webhook call, and this is a really important node when it comes to building n8n workflows in mind of voice AI applications. So this runs the flow on receiving an HTTP request. So we'll have pretty much a placeholder here that listens for data that's sent from an external source, and then when it does receive that data, the following nodes or entirety of our workflow is executed. We've also got an on-form submission here, which is really good for passing data that a customer or client or user had submitted on a form-based view. So name, number, email, time zone, and things like that we can collect on form submission here and use those details to perform some back-end automation following their form completion. We've also got a trigger here when executed by another workflow. So this runs our flow when called by the execute workflow node from a different workflow. So if we have two workflows where the result of one workflow should trigger the starting of the second workflow, we can do that. So there's a specific node in here that I can show you later that triggers our second workflow. So when that's done, it'll trigger this, for example, and then complete that workflow. We've also got on chat message, which we can use today as well, and a bunch of other different ways here. So an email trigger, triggering the workflow when a new email is received. error triggers when another workflow has an error, so we can start to build out these error handling automations. We've got the MCP server trigger, n8n, and server-side events, which we won't get into. The first one we're going to do is we're going to hit the trigger manually. This is the easiest thing to use when it comes to starting to use n8n. And you'll see at the top here, we've got about 3 options here. The one on the left is to test this step. The next one is to deactivate this specific node, and then obviously delete here. And we've got similar options here if we click the 3 dots: test, rename, deactivate, copy, tidy up workflow, clear section, and delete. Now, when clicking test workflow, this is the trigger. And really the core concepts that we have to get familiar here with is triggers and transformations, as well as data output handling. So a trigger is pretty much a single event that should determine when a workflow or when logic should be ran. So as I mentioned, there are 100 different triggers that we can do, but it is some specific event that indicates to us that we should start running some logic. And this is simply, the event is when I hit test workflow, we run. And you'll see 1 item there. And if we double click, we'll bring up our node view. And typically a node view has an input and output side, as well as this middle canvas, which brings up our node details. Now, this node is where the workflow execution starts. So for instance, when I clicked that test button on the canvas, we were able to start our workflow. And because there's nothing connected here, we're not going to have any output or input, but we'll just get into this. We've got settings here. We can leave notes on each node as well, displaying those notes in the flow and so forth. Now, what's important to note here on the output side is we'll either have a successful run or a non-successful run, which will be indicated by this green tick or a red X. And these items, or this canvas here, will display all the output items associated with the running of this node. And we have 3 different views in which we can view this output. The first being a schema, the second being a table, and the third being in raw JSON. And over here, we can edit our output, which we can get into in a moment, and we can pin specific outputs. So we'll go ahead and add our second node to really get an understanding of this. Now, let's consider an example where we have to distribute a call or prepare some data from a CRM or anything like that to then send to an external source. And in this video, that's what we'll do. We'll set up a workflow and go through the core concepts behind setting up that workflow for sending data to an external source and the preparation behind that data being sent to an external source. And then on the flip side of that, we're going to prepare and manipulate data that we receive into our n8n workflow, and maybe when we want to transform that data and store it somewhere also. So once you have your trigger defined, we can start to build out from the first trigger. And we can do that by hitting the plus button here, and this will bring up a bunch of different nodes that we can start to use. Now, the top one here is AI, so this is pertaining to AI nodes, and the most common one you'll see is this AI agent, where we can start to have an agent do all this data transformation and manipulation autonomously itself without having to go through these data transformation nodes and so forth. We can also use OpenAI models for messaging and assistant, analyzing images, generating audio. We can use basic LLM chains to chain prompts to larger language models, information extractors, so turning text into structured formats, question and answer chain, sentiment analysis, summarization, text classification, AI transformation, and other AI nodes. including memory, large language models, document loaders, everything like that. There is a lot of nodes to get through here, and that's just pertaining to the AI nodes. Back here, we can have action in app, so where we want to do something in an app or service, particularly those external services like Google Sheets, Telegrams, or Notion. And you'll see here, again, we have the option to choose from thousands of different external services that we want to submit an event to or have an event occur within those apps. We've also got data transformation, which is really important here. So this is where we can see our popular nodes pertaining to data transformation here. AI transformation, so using AI to do data transformation, where you can write in plain English what you want it to do. We've got code, probably arguably the most powerful node in n8n here. Date and time, where we can manipulate date and time. Edit fields, where we can set, modify, and add or remove item fields. And then we've got things like filter, limit, removing duplicates, split out combined items, merge, summarize, converting data, so compression, converting to file, cryptography, everything like that. A lot of different data transformation nodes here. We've got flow also. So again, filter, if statements, looping over items, merging, comparing data sets, executing sub workflows, stopping error, switch, wait, and we'll get into a lot of these throughout the course. And then over here, we've got our core nodes. So code is very popular, HTTP request, and webhook. We'll be using a lot of these to HTTP request webhook. We've got other ones here that we've been through. And finally, down here, we've got human in the loop. So where we want to wait for an approval by a real human like myself, we can send a message via Discord, Gmail, Google Chat, Outlook, Teams, email, Slack, Telegram, and WhatsApp to ask for approval that we can continue the workflow execution. For now, we're going to use data transformation. So I've been throwing out these words, trigger, data transformation, and output. So it makes sense here to get into the data transformation side of things. And particularly here, I'm going to set the scene on what we're looking to achieve. So we want to envision a scenario where on clicking the workflow or on any trigger, we are able to send a customer's name, some information about them, their number to an external source, or have our workflow be able to process this data and format it correctly to be able to send it to an external source. And this is really the core concept when it comes to making outbound calls with AI voice agents, or making an outbound request to whatever service or platform that you're looking to interact with. So I'm going to use the edit field set here, for example. And you'll see here, this brings up our normal nodular-based view where we have the input side on the left here and then the output side on the right here. And on the input side, we can see the modules or nodes that are before this node. So we had our trigger node when clicking test workflow. You'll see the input here. We don't have any input here. We'll also have a 3 view here where we can check the schema, table, JSON, and so forth. We've got variables and context here. We won't worry about that. But really the main thing here is in the middle where we're editing this node that we had just added. So when it comes to edit fields, we have a different set of modes here. We've got manual mapping where we can drag or click here and map these fields that we want to set. We also have JSON here where we can add our own fields, so field 1 and that value, field 2 and that value, and so forth. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to manual map here. Now, edit fields basically pertaining to what fields are being set and what format should those fields be in. So I'm going to go ahead and click this box here. And you'll see our first field here is populated that we can start to edit. We've got the name and value here. We've also got in the middle here what format this particular field should be in, from string, number, boolean, array, or an object. So a string, for example, would be name, Jonas. A number, for example, would be perhaps my phone, and then a phone number, for example. A boolean would be a true or false response. So if it's like qualified, I'm either qualified true or qualified I'm not, which is false. We've got an array, so what is the name of the array in which sub-objects fall into? And then we've got an object here, though being those sub-objects, I guess, where it's a key and value. For now, we're gonna use string, and we'll name this first field to the user's name. And the value here, I'm gonna set my own name, and we can add a new field also, and let's call this number. Let's change this to a number here. We'll call it 04, blah, blah, blah. And then we'll add a new input field, email. And this is going to be a string as well. And I'm just adding these as, dummy values to show you what happens when we set these fields and run this workflow. If I scroll down here, we'll see a view or include other input fields. And this means that data or input that is before this edit fields node is passed along to subsequent nodes. And this won't be important for now, but in later workflows, we'll want to likely set this up. We've also got options here where we can ignore type conversion errors. So in the event that we're using input variables here and they don't match the format which we've specified here, like string, number, boolean, array, and object, we can ignore that error. Support dot notation doesn't really matter. We'll delete that for now. We've also got settings over here. So we just went through the parameters of this specific node. We've got settings also where we can duplicate items, always output data, execute once, retry on fail, or on error, what do we do? Stop the workflow, continue using error output. We can also, again, leave a note in this flow. If you select retry and fail, we can specify the max retrials and the time interval between tries as well. So really robust here when it comes to error handling, even at the nodular level. So each node has this idea of error handling. For now, we'll take that off. Now, if you're wondering about any specific node and needing some assistance with that node, up the top right-hand side here, we have docs, and this will give you an overview of what node you're working with and what parameters it takes and how to navigate that specific node. So we haven't ran this execution yet, but we will do in just a second. But to get out of this edit field here, we can just click the gray up the top here, and this will bring you back to your canvas view. Now, we can also right click and rename a module as well. Let's call this name, number, email, for example, where we're setting those variables or setting those fields. And this will rename each node to what you want. We can also rename our first trigger here and call this click. Now, to save a workflow, when you're ready with the workflow, we can go up to the top right-hand side here and hit save. This will save your progress so you don't lose it. We can also share up here as well. And we can also check the workflow history. And on the dots here, we can duplicate this workflow, download it, rename the entire workflow, import a workflow from a URL, or import from file, and then some other settings here. To rename a workflow, you would just head up to the left-hand side here, and let's call this set fields, for example. Hit enter to save that name, and we can also add a tag here, And for instance, let's call this education, and we can create our own tags and start to sort of manage different workflows a bit easier by setting these tags. Enough rambling, let's go ahead and test this workflow down the bottom here. You can also test this workflow by hitting Command Enter, and this will run the workflow. 2 green ticks means it's all good. If I go into the last node of our workflow, we'll see what happens. And there we go. So on our input side, there are no fields or any specific values that we're using on the input side. It's just the action of clicking which starts this execution. And most importantly here, guys, is on the output side. We have a green tick here, and we'll see the time in which we ran it, and you'll see the item. So here, we're in a JSON view where we're inside our array, and we have 3 different key values here, which we set manually. So this is the output. So on input, where we're clicking that specific trigger, we produce this output. And we produce this output by manually mapping and setting some fields. And these are the fields that we had just entered. Now, like I mentioned, we have a bunch of different views. So if you're more familiar with a tabular view, we've got name, number, email, or a schema here. We've also got that here. Perfect. So now that we have our output or some data that we can work off here, what do we do next? Maybe we want to perhaps check whether someone's name is Jonas or not, and then determine where they should go. So let's click out of this, and again, I'm just bringing some ideas into play here, bringing some ideas into focus when it comes to starting to get familiar with working with the n8n. So bear with me here, guys, but let's start to build out a workflow where we're wanting to call or perhaps send data of a specific person. So to add a new node where we can start to continuously build on the existing logic we have here, we can click the plus button again, and we're going to go into our flow section here. And specifically, we're going to tie in, again, another very, very important node when it comes to preparing workflows for AI voice automation, and that's the if branch. So if, which is a conditional statement, so whether a condition is met, it'll either be true or false. It routes it to different branches in our workflow. So let's go ahead and use that. We'll just click out of this first. And you'll see here, so we're clicking, setting those variables, and then we have an if statement here where we have 2 outcome paths. So previously, we could only run sequentially here, click into name and number, name into number, into if. Now, what if does is, if we click into it now, we'll be able to set a parameter, specifically conditions. So we're able to say if value 1 is matching a condition, and we have a bunch of different conditions. So we have string conditions, exists, doesn't exist, and so forth. We've got number conditions, date and time conditions, Boolean, and array and objects that we can start to use to route between true and false pathing. So let's put this into focus here. And on the input side here, guys, you'll notice our last module that we had ran. And this is good because we can start to actually use tangible values in following nodes. And this is how we start to move data along a workflow to transform, send to different places and everything like that. And this is really where it starts to get quite cool. So you'll see here on the input side, I've got my name, I've got my number, I've got my email, all of which are values that we can use in subsequent modules. Say perhaps in this workflow, we're wanting to on-click set those variables, check if the name is equal to me or not. If it is, then we want to perhaps send it somewhere. If it's not, then we perhaps want to throw an error. So to use input values, we can do one of two things. So we can drag an input field from the left to use it here, or we can reference it as an expression, and we won't get into that in just a moment. The easiest way to do that is click into value 1, and we can drag it like that. Very easy. And as I suggested, we can reference it by using $jason.name. You'll note here the two different options that we have here, being fixed and expression. Basically, the difference here is this is hard-coded and this is dynamic. And what I mean by that is a hard-coded value 1, for instance, would be my name, and an expression would be any name that we have in previous nodes. So this would be Jason name. So maybe I'm switching out my name to Mark or something like that. Maybe I'm switching out my number, and this would be constantly changing. This is an expression. Now we're using this name and running it through a conditional statement. So we're saying if name Jonas is equal to value 2, and we haven't set a value 2 here. We can also use different things like whether the name even exists, whether it doesn't exist, if it's empty, if it's not empty, if it's equal to, which is the one we're on now, if it's not equal to, or if it contains specific characters, or if it doesn't contain specific characters, or it starts with J, or it starts with M, or it doesn't start with J or M, ends with so many different conditionals that we can choose from here to suit any sort of need. For now, we're going to change this. We'll leave this as, for now, we'll leave this as is equal to. We'll go ahead and click that, and we know we want to check whether this name is equal to my name, which is Jonas. So here we can write a fixed expression here, which is Jonas. So essentially what we're having done here, if I really just break it down, we're using an if node here, which basically matches certain values on a condition and either routes in a true path if the condition is met, or a false path if the condition is not met. And here we're setting our specific condition. And what we're doing here is checking if input name, which is our input from the previous node, set multiple variables or set fields. We're checking specifically if the name is equal to Jonas. So value 1 is going to be our input value, our condition. So input value passes into our condition. The condition performs, and then we have our matched value where the condition has to match it to that value. And then on the output side is whether that condition was met or not. Again, we can convert types where required. So perhaps it's ambiguous in whether a value is a string or a number or a date and time. We can convert those so this doesn't throw an error, because you can see here we have different conditions for different data types. We can continuously add conditions, and I'll just show you this here, where we can start to stack these conditions together. So perhaps we don't just want to check if the name is equal to Jonas, we want to check also if the number exists. Maybe we don't have a phone number that we couldn't even call. So this is where we can stack different conditions together, and we can use either and or statements. So put quite simply, this first condition is perhaps name is equal to Jonas and value 1 is equal to value 2, or value 1 is equal to value 2. And the difference here is with and statements, both conditions have to be met. With or statements, one of the two have to be met. So we're going to map this out really quick, and we'll use an and statement. So we want to check if the name is equal to Jonas, and we also want to check if our number, which we can drag over here, exists. If it doesn't exist, then we've got no one to call. right? So this is starting to pull together these ideas of checking and preparing data to be sent or executed externally. So again, to go through this, we're checking if condition 1, specifically name is equal to Jonas. And so both of these conditions have to be met. Our number actually exists. And once that's all set up, we've also got the options to go into settings again, which we went through previously, to suit your needs. If I go back here and I click on the gray over here, this will go outside of that view here. And again, command clicking or using 2 fingers to navigate through the workflow. Okay. So we don't have anything connected to the true or false path, but I want to go ahead and command enter or click test workflow to run this execution. Cool. And you'll see this had ran. And if I go into the if statement here and drag this over here, we'll see our output and we have these 2 branches. You'll notice here the output went on the false branch side, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to work out why it was false, e.g. our conditions weren't in fact met. So remember, JSON name, which is our name, is equal to Jonas, and our number exists. And this might be a small find, or it might be very easy for you guys, but go ahead and pause the video and just check, leave a comment below why you think this went wrong. Put simply, guys, this is case sensitive. So I've got a capital J here, and our input or our values that we said here is not a capital J. If I were to change that to a lowercase j and then tested that step, it'd go down the true branch. So keeping in mind these conditionals are case sensitive, and once you understand that, you'll know how to use those a bit better. Remembering with string values as well, it's only applicable because it is case sensitive. So we want to now route this data essentially, and picture this workflow that we're just moving data along these different steps. Data is populated at this section here, it's moved into if, and now it's moved off this true branch or false branch, and we're basically moving and manipulating it slowly during the course of its workflow to really prepare us for, or prepare this data for properly being used in certain context. So let's continue building this out, guys. We've used a field set. We've used an if statement. Now we can go up a true branch where we can click the plus button here, and maybe we want to do something, okay? Let's use the AI autonomous agent here, and what we can do here is just go ahead and click that, and we'll use an AI agent. And this looks a bit daunting, but trust me guys, it is not. It's very simple to use. Now, if we have a name that is equal to my name and the number exists, perhaps we want to send a call to, and we're not going to actually send a call here, so we'll use an agent instead. We want to take that name and maybe generate a personalized message or something of that nature. And we can do this quite easily with an AI agent, which will help you understanding how this works and also tie in some different concepts as well. And this will help you transfer data quite easily without having to do these setting variables and if statements and things like that. So to set up an agent, specifically hitting that plus button, agent, and hitting that agent, we've got a bunch of different agents we can choose from, by the way. Hitting that agent, we can start to map this out, and we'll double click into this AI agent here. So you see under the parameters section, the source for the prompt. So we're going to need a user message to trigger this AI agent unless we specify or define below. So what it means by connect chat trigger node is on this test workflow click button here if instead we had perhaps a chat trigger, where instead of clicking that workflow, we could test chat, where down the bottom here, we've got our chat session and we write it a message, then we could use that specific tools agent. For now, it doesn't even matter because we can just define how we should run this agent below. So if you're a bit lost here, let me bring it back in. We're in the AI agent and we'll quickly test our workflow first. We're in our AI agent here, and the source for prompt, we need to pass in a user message to speak with, put simply, an LLM. And this is what it's saying for source for prompt. So we can either use that chat trigger node or we can hit define below. And this we can put in a prompt, a user message. Perhaps I want to say, you must, and think of this like talking to ChatGPT, you must create an email for Jonas to tell them you will call them at a later date. So this is our prompt to the LLM. And we can choose things like require specific output formats. We can add some options here. System message, max iterations, return intermediate steps, automatically pass through binary images. Now this is getting a bit complicated for a beginner, I guess, course. But for now, we can just use source for prompt, defining below. We've got a prompt here. We can hit enter, enter, and we can drag this out a bit. Now this is where I can go ahead and click expression and start to use, and you can maximize this view here by the bottom right. This is our expression. So this is where I can start to use anything inside these two curly braces to pass dynamically into this system prompt. So remember this, what I had just wrote is a fixed, they're all fixed values. If I were to drag in the result of our if statement, so perhaps the name, the number, and the user's email, these would all be passed in the prompt. E.g., ChatGPT would know what those variables are and who to send this email. And I can say something like these. These are details pertaining to the user, devise an email using some of those. So we must create an email. These are the user details to create that email with, and it should output us an example email. So I can go ahead and click out of this. I can click out of this, and we need to connect a chat model to this. What specific LLM are we indeed talking to? And you can connect any one of these. There's quite a lot here. We can connect OpenAI chat model down the bottom here. If I click that, you'll have an option here, maybe to get 100 free credits or connect with our credentials. And you're going to be doing a lot of this when it comes to working with n8n automations. And this is part of the reason why I chose this one. OpenAI, everyone has OpenAI nowadays, so very easy to get credentials with. And I'll show you the credential process in terms of connecting it up to each of these nodes. Now, very simply, when you don't have a credential, it'll prompt you to select a credential. And if you don't have one here, we can hit create new credential. And this will set up this connection tab here where it'll ask you for specific credentials pertaining to that node. It's asking for a required API key here where we have to paste that in here. It's asking for an API key where we have to paste this in. So what I can do is head over to platform.openai. I can log in I can head over to the dashboard and I can come down to API keys and I can create a new secret key. We'll call this n8n starter. I can create a new secret key and then copy that, head back over to our API key and paste that in. Once that's pasted in, we can go ahead and hit save and it'll populate connection tested successfully if that API key was correct and it was able to authenticate connecting to OpenAI. If it was failed, you'll get a failed message and you'll have to retry. We can hit X and now we'll have selected our OpenAI account. This means that we can use OpenAI's chat model within n8n and we can select the model here. We'll use GPT-4o Mini for now. We can have some options here, which we won't get into right now. We've got some settings, again, displaying a note, but once that's connected and you've first connected your credentials, well done for connecting your first credential. We can click out of this, and now this model is equipped with a brain. We can also connect some memory, and we've got a bunch of different memories that we can choose from. So if we have to recall chat memory and agent memory, what memory storage do we use? And for beginners, we use simple memory. And we'll just leave this as is. So now we've got an intelligent brain that's connected to memory. We won't connect a tool just now. To run it back through, when we click this, we're setting a name, email, and mobile number. We're checking if that name is Jonas and the mobile exists. If it does, we're going to devise a simple email where this should output an email structure saying that we will call the user at a later date. And we want to include some of these input fields that we had collected. So if I hit save on that one and run this workflow, we're getting an error in subnode, simple memory. So guys, this is really good. We get a first-hand approach to working with error handling. And put simply, it's error in subnode, simple memory, so the memory we had just put in, and the session key from previous node. When an expression is read, it basically means it's wrong, and I ignored this previously to show this error. It's trying to get the session key from a previous node. However, we've defined the session ID to be from a connected chat trigger node. We haven't done that. We're not using a chat trigger node, we're using a click trigger node. So for now, we're going to define this below, and this can just be whatever we want. It's really not important at the moment, we just want this to work. A key could be key is equal to chat or something like that, just to get rid of that error. If we save that, now Command Enter to run this, you'll see it's working. And look at that, guys. So our first AI agent, look at this. So if I go input side, this is what we gave it. And then if I go on the output side, this is what we outputted. And we'll use a schema here. So we've got an email scheduled. Look at that, perfect, perfect, perfect. Now we can connect this when we have our outcome. We can connect this to something like Gmail. What if we want to send an email? And so forth. And later in course 2, we'll get into actually sending calls. But for now, to really solidify these ideas, we'll go ahead and connect to where our data is going to exit n8n. So we had started our workflow, we had populated data throughout the course of the workflow, and now we've transformed or manipulated that data to work for us. So sending it either true or false, taking it into an agent to use some of this data to draft an email. And now we're going to release this data to the world or programmatically into a different system, which will be Gmail. So how do we do that? Let's go ahead and hit plus, search up Gmail, scroll down here to creating a draft. And again, we're going to take this idea of connecting with a credential. So select credential, create new credential, and we'll use OAuth. where we'll sign in with Google. And you want to access or allow permissions, hit continue. You'll see connection successful, exit out of that, and we've signed in with Google. Now it's connected to our email account. We want to use a draft email. Maybe we want to draft this and have it reviewed. We're going to create, and the subject here, we know it's going to be upcoming call, and the email text, we can add the message, and the message we want to be the output of our AI agent, which we can simply drag in like so. Perfect. So we've connected to our Gmail account, we're creating a draft resource, and we're putting in a subject, and we could even tie in other variables as well, like the name. So upcoming call, and then my name, making it a bit more personalized. And then we're going to send text, and specifically that text is the output of our AI agent. Let's click out of this, hit save guys, and then we'll hit test workflow or command enter. And look at that, perfect, perfect, perfect. So if I go over to my emails, you'll see my draft just there, upcoming call, Jonas, perfect. Look at that guys, perfect, perfect, perfect. Now if I go back here, we'll note it wasn't sending to anyone because this is a draft. If I want to change this to actually sending an email, we'll need to populate a lot of those variables here. And this is just an example of first collecting data throughout the process of our workflow execution, transforming that data using some cool things like an if statement and set variables, as well as an AI autonomous agent here, and then taking that data and sending it elsewhere. So really the data was created in one platform, and now it's ended up in our drafts inbox within Gmail, which is quite impressive here. So there you have it guys. If you're following through, you've created your first email, I guess, drafter, and you've correctly understood how we can start to set variables and the different types of variables that you can create, being string, number, boolean, array, objects. We've correctly routed data where they meet specific conditions, and we've correctly used a tool like an AI agent to transform and structure that data, and then we've prepared that data to be sent to an external source. Very, very cool, guys. What I'm going to do now is we're going to delete this and clean the slate. Let's go ahead and bin all these. I know you're probably like, no, don't get rid of them, but that is okay. We're going to start from a clean slate, guys. Welcome to the second part in a 3-part series for n8n automation for voice AI. In this part, we are going to be going through working with APIs, really the core components when it comes to pulling different data sources from different platforms and web applications. So as I mentioned, we'll get a hands-on approach here with working with HTTP requests, authentication, and transforming external data into voice agent fuel. We'll be able to build real integrations here with external tools, authenticate, enrich, and route our data between workflows and between segments. And given the nature of APIs, we'll be able to connect our CRMs, calendars, and AI models, particularly voice AI models, at ease. And there are some great examples of why we need to be using, and working with APIs at large. And obviously we have things like pre-qualifying leads before calling them. So calling from an external database or CRM, checking available time slots as well. So calling an external calendar and returning time slots and things like that. Logging everything to our database and dashboard or CRM. So really, really a core component here when it comes to building voice AI based automations and turning those agents into powerful and useful tools for businesses or yourself. So again, another big one here. So we'll lock in now and jump straight into it. So now we're going to go through working sort of with APIs, and I guess the beginning part of this would be working first with webhooks. Now, what you had saw in the last workflow we had just created, underlying all those modules is essentially an API. So when we had drafted that email, n8n has put together a specific node for Gmail where we have all these actions we can perform and all these triggers, which behind these is pretty much a wrapper of an API. So Google Cloud will have endpoints where you can actually mark a message as read or whatever it may be, that we have to populate certain fields, e.g. these parameters, to facilitate that API call. And we're authenticating in with our Gmail authentication, which is online authentication. This had brought up a pop-up screen where we could log into our Gmail account and select what access it has pertaining to our Google account, and therefore we're able to authenticate and use this Gmail OAuth2 API. Now there's different ways that we can start to authenticate in. The second being a service account, for example, into Gmail. We won't get into that now, but what we'll do is we'll delete this and prepare this idea of sending data from an external source into our n8n workflow. So we're going to do some data ingress where data is coming into our ecosystem here from an external source. And the only real way of doing this is via something like a webhook. A webhook is, think of it like a train station where we're waiting for a train to come in, and that train is the data. The train knows where to go, e.g. the station, and we are just waiting until that train comes. So let's go ahead and delete this. The first step here, if we hit that, you'll see on webhook call. Let's go ahead and click that. Now, this is really a lot of where data originates from this webhook node when it comes to voice agents in particular. So when an event happens on our voice agent side, and if you're familiar with my channel, I've gone through 40 plus videos of creating these agents. Something needs to happen, or this data needs to be sent somewhere post-call or pre-call. And we may receive data like a transcript, the call cost, everything like that. And this isn't just relating to voice agents, this could be whatever. So if I click a campaign, for example, and run an email campaign, we want to know what was the result of that campaign. And this is in the form of an outcome or a data output. And how we start to receive specific data output is via this concept like a webhook. Now, running through this webhook node, we've got parameters, our webhook URLs, and this is the endpoint or the address or that train station address where this data should be sent to. And we've got two things here, the test URL and the production URL. And the difference here is the test will have webhook-test, production won't. And test URLs will be used when our workflow is inactive. So when we're testing this out. The production URL will be used when we activate this scenario, right? So workflow activated, we can now make calls to our production webhook URL. We'll go ahead and deactivate it because we're obviously testing this. Go back into this. Moving down, we have the HTTP methods, which are pretty self-explanatory. So get is meaning we're getting data from this test URL But because this test URL has nothing in it, e.g. there's no data we're collecting from this there's no data in this webhook, we need to change this to something like post. And we've got a bunch of different methods where we can delete data that is located at this address. We can obviously amend headers at this address. We can patch data, so update data at that address. We can also, again, put some data at that address. So again, updating or amending specific sets of data. We're going to be focusing on post because we are sending data to this address. So we're going to post data to this address. The path here is the specific ending of this main URL. So this endpoint here, and we can add some authentication. So does an external platform need to authenticate to send data to our address? And this is starting to add some security around communicating with different platforms. So we can have basic authentication where we can create a credential for this specific path here. We can use header authentication where again we can create a credential, and on an external platform we have to include in the headers authorization, bearer space API key, for example. We can also use a JSON web token. We can also just have none, and we'll do none for now. Now the response here is, how do we want to respond to our external application when it hits our webhook? And there's three different response mechanisms here. We can either respond immediately when this webhook is executed, or respond when the last node in our workflow is finished, or respond using a respond to webhook node. And this means that we can respond with any data that we want. And let's go ahead and click that. We've got some options here. So we can start to allow cores, field names for binary, ignore bots. We can start to whitelist IP addresses, raw body response headers. For now, let's not worry about any of that. Under the settings here, we can allow multiple HTTP methods. So where we want this webhook to allow sending data out, allow patching and things like that, we can enable that. But for now, we're using post. Again, we can display notes in here. We won't get into that now. So now that we have our test URL that can have data sent to it via a post method, it will be good to send some data into this. So let's click out of this. And now we have pretty much our train station here waiting for data. Now we could send data via another n8n workflow, and I might do that now just to showcase and keep within the n8n ecosystem here, but we'll go ahead and hit save. But it's probably better to start to build upon your knowledge on really connecting external platforms and so forth into your n8n ecosystem. And I've got a little thumbs up there. And I think this is a good place to start. And the easiest platform to use when it comes to testing out endpoints and testing out APIs is something like Postman. So if you're not familiar with Postman, this is just an API network where we can start to send API requests to other platforms. And remember, what we're going to do here is we're going to send data to this address. It's very simple. And we know it is a post request because we had sent it as a post request. So we want to change our request. Now, I recommend creating an account here, heading into your collections, and then adding a new collection. And we'll set up this as a post request. The URL or endpoint we're posting data to, we know because we have it just here, guys. And we can click to copy, head back over there and simply paste. And we can send whatever data we want. Now the parameters here, we can query parameters, and this is pertaining to get so we won't worry about that. Again, if we were to add authentication, guys, in this section here, we would have to specify that here. If we were adding headers here, we would have to specify that here. But because we haven't set that up n8n side, we don't have to do any of that. We can go over to the body under raw. We can start to add in JSON format what specific data we're wanting to send to this address. Now, think of JSON as basically human readable code. Now, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, where we're using this idea of a bunch of key value objects. So to start a JSON structure, we'll open curly braces and we'll hit enter a few times, give us some space. Now, what exactly do we want to send to n8n? Now, in the context of voice agents, a lot of the times we're reading data to distribute a call or reading data from an end of call report in the form of this JSON. So we can make up whatever you want here, and you start by specifying a key value by open quotation marks, and let's say transcript is the first object we want to send. Outside of the quotation marks, semicolon, and then re-engage your quotation marks, and we'll just make up a fake transcript. This is Johnny calling. Now, that's really simple. That's all we have to do. Let's say we want to send the value name transcript and the value there as this string. Now, if I were changing this data type from a string to a number, we wouldn't be using quotation marks, we'd be using numbers. If I wanted to change it to Boolean, we would use either true without quotation marks or false. If I wanted to change it to something else, we can do so also. But for the purposes of this, we're going to use a string, which is inside quotation marks. Hello, this is Johnny calling. Now, maybe we want to add another object, and to do that, we can hit the comma, enter, open quotes, and let's do the name, and then again, comma, enter, and the number, and this will come together in a moment. And because I'm going to use a phone number here, I can still do a string. And essentially what we're specifying here is we're sending 3 values, transcript, name, and number, populated by these strings. What I can do now to get back over into n8n is we'll listen for test event, and this is listening for data to be sent into it. If I go over to Postman and hit send, workflow could not be started, so we have a webhook error. You'll see here, no respond to node found in workflow, and this is because we're responding to that request with using respond to webhook node. So for the purposes of testing, just to get data in here, we'll respond immediately and then listen for test event, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. And then let's go ahead and send this. So we'll get 200, meaning that was okay. If I go back in, look at this. So on the output side, guys, we have all our headers associated with that API request, and specifically the body we're interested here is these data points we had sent from an external source. So if I go into the schema here, body transcript, hello, this is Johnny calling, name, Jonas, number, there we go, cool. So this is really important when it comes to connecting different platforms together. They all communicate with this idea of webhooks and APIs, and webhooks are really the foundations. And what we have just displayed here is being able to send data from one source into our n8n workflow. This operates similar to if I were to, using Gmail as an example, have a trigger down here on message received, where we're waiting for a message to be received. And again, you'll see here, fetch test event. This operates very similar. It's just a wrapper on side of this webhook. So this would have an address where we're sending data to, and then when we have data sent to, we can manipulate that however we want. But if you're following along, we have data now originating outside of n8n being sent into our data, our n8n ecosystem here. And specifically, we're interested in this body data here, transcript, name, and number. So now that we have data, you'll note that we have a lot of it. And we don't need all this data. We only want to collect the pertinent details here, transcript, name, and number. So we're going to jump in again to this idea of data transformation. And we want to set 3 variables similar to what we had done before. Pause the video and try and work out what node is most appropriate to use for that. If I hit tab, we'll open up what happens next, and we can go down to data transformation here, and you guessed it, we'll use edit fields set. Cool. Now we can do manual mapping again, JSON, and we can click add fields here. And what we want to do is specify that we only want to pass this data through our workflow. We don't care about all this other stuff. So we can use the name, and instead of hard coding this value like we did in section 1, we're going to use an expression, and we're going to drag in the name, where this can dynamically change based on the data we set. We can add another field. Let's call this transcript. And again, changing that to an expression. Drag in the transcript. And then we'll add another one, number. Value, expression, drag in the number. Let's exit out of that. Now, if I go back to the webhook, we know we have those 3 values, and up the top right-hand side here, we can pin data. And this is really helpful so we don't have to continuously submit these API requests from external platforms to continuously test. And this is a really good advantage when it comes to receiving a lot of complex data or call data where we have to actually have a call to receive this output data. By pinning data, we're pinning all this output data that we can continuously use and continuously run workflow executions. And I'll show you why this is important. So I won't click this just now, but if I test this workflow, you'll see waiting for you to call the test URL. We don't have that data anymore because it was received on our first test workflow. So in that point, we'll have to come back to our Postman and submit these details again. If I send that, we'll come back in, and there we go. Now you'll see in our edit fields, we've only collected now those details that we really wanted, the name, transcript, and number. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit save on that one. And we'll come back to the webhook, and now we'll pin this data. Now, if you notice, if I test workflow again by clicking this or command enter, you'll see the data remains persistent on our webhook input side. So now we're collecting the name, transcript, and number. We don't have to go back to Postman and submit this data again. So if you're at this point, you're doing very well. So we've thought of this idea of, so we've gone through this idea of sending data from an external source into our n8n ecosystem, and how that's similar to other triggers in n8n, and how a lot of these apps, if I hit tab, action in app, a lot of these apps are wrappers behind, these ideas of webhooks and APIs. So when you look at things like Airtable and that trigger on Airtable new event, really what's going on here is it's a webhook with a little wrapper on it specific to Airtable. Now that we have data and we've set those specific fields, now let's plus into that. We'll do flow, And what if we want to use the if statement again? Look at that, cool. Now we've received data from an external source on our input side, and we've transformed that data to only relay to us the name, transcript, and number. Now we want to perhaps use this number to distribute a call to. We want to call using their name, their number, but more specifically, we have a transcript here. So this is more akin to end of call. So we can start to build upon this data here and manipulate it in ways that we want to. And I want to be real specific here to how this relates back to voice agents. So let's assume here that our output here, which we receive from our webhook, is what happens when a call was finished. We want to use this transcript in some way, or name and number in some meaningful way, to reflect on a CRM or database that this lead was called. So how do we do that? We can use an if statement to see, firstly, if a transcript exists. What if we call a user and we didn't reach the user? The transcript wouldn't exist in that case. So we want to check here, using this idea of an if statement, if a transcript exists. So a different concept. And if we go out of this, test workflow, you'll see it's true because it does exist. If it was false, it wouldn't have existed. And we want to say something like, if the transcript did exist, let's reflect that on a CRM. We'll also reflect it on a CRM if it didn't exist. So how do we start to do that? Let's take Airtable, for example, and we'll build a new base. Now this is going to be acting as our external CRM. We can keep the name and we'll call this transcript, long text, save, and we'll move this over here. We'll leave status, we'll delete this, and this will all come together. Delete field, and right click, insert right. We'll call this number, for example. Oh, single line text, number. Maybe we'll move that over here. So we have the name, number, transcript, similar to what we're getting via that webhook. And we're gonna add some statuses here. So we'll add called or failed. So those two statuses, guys. So we have our Airtable base, it's untitled. Let's title this example CRM. And we have table 1. Let's rename this to contacts. And we have these specific columns and rows. Let's head back over to n8n. If a transcript exists, we want to reflect that on the CRM. So let's go to Airtable, we'll search up Airtable here, and we're going to look for create a record. Cool. And maybe we want to also reflect if that customer didn't have a transcript on that CRM also to determine that the call was failed. We can right click, duplicate, and drag the false path into it. Now, guess what we need to do next? We need to double click into that and we need to authenticate into Airtable. We can create a new credential. We'll use an access token this time. We'll go to airtable.com/create/tokens new. We'll call this n8n starter and we'll add scopes, read, write, and then schema bases read. We'll add a base, which is the base we had just created. Example CRM, create token. Copy this, similar to what we were doing with OpenAI before. Paste that in like so, hit save, and we'll be good to go. Awesome. Now that we're authenticated in, and mind you, this is the exact same as doing a post request to Airtable, only this is a wrapper of an API. We'll select from list the base we want to choose, example CRM, and from the table, our contacts table, and we want to put in the name, and we can drag that in, the transcript, the number, and we can select the status here. So on the true side, if the transcript was found, the status was called. On the false side, if again, I choose from list, example CRM, table, contacts, and we don't have any input variables here, so we'll have to enable the false path. What we'll do here is go to the webhook, unpin this data, and we'll test this step, right? And we'll come back over to our Postman and we'll delete the transcript. Send, okay. Now we've got a false path, we'll pin that data and we'll just remove that. Test workflow. Transcript doesn't exist. We'll have to remove that entirety of the transcript. Go ahead and go over to this, unpin this data. And this is, coming from a debugging side of things, trying to make things work for you. We'll go ahead and send that now. Pin this data, and you'll see if I test workflow now, we're down the false path. So what I was doing there is just testing to get data populated down this false path. And we know if transcript is null, the status is failed. And we can use the name here, the number, and we won't have a transcript, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and hit save. We'll go back over to the webhook, unpin that data, and now we can test the entire workflow. We can test that. Let's come back over to our Postman, and let's put back in the transcript. Call it hello. Hit send. Now if I go to my Airtable, look at that. Delete those, delete that. See, called with our transcript, name and number. If I go back to n8n, you'll see it went up this true path. Now if I test again, heading back over to Postman, deleting that, hitting send, you'll see it went down the false path and therefore created a record that was failed. Look at that. So now, in this second example, we have a scenario where we're receiving data to a webhook or an address from an external source. We're manipulating that data, transforming that data, and then sending it back out to store. So in our CRM, or it could be a database, or it could be whatever you may wish. So very good concept here to get very familiar with. Now, of course, in a real scenario, we wouldn't be using something like Postman. This data would be sent automatically via a software or a program. So take VAPI, for example. After a call is finished and we specify a webhook address, it will automatically send a payload of data to that address on every time a call was ended. And when we have scenarios like this activated, we're able to process that information and store that information automatically without having to go through this manual process of sifting through each end of call data chunk and then determining it that way. So a very core concept, this idea of a webhook. Now, I mentioned this was getting familiar with API requests. And outside of the fact that most of these nodes are wrappers of API requests, I want to show you exactly the same, what it looks like to create a record via API in place of using these nodes. So tying together, the ideas of really what's happening underneath those. And to create an API request, we can hit plus and search up HTTP, make a request. And we'll duplicate this. So we're going to put in place here on what's really going on underneath that Airtable node. Now, given there is an Airtable node, and I'll pull up this just for reference, it's far more easier to use this node than it is to use an HTTP request. Now, the reason I'm doing this HTTP request instead of this node is really to just hit home this idea of really what is happening underneath all these wrappers and all these fancy Airtable records, right? So again, we have a credential to connect with, a resource we know is record, our operation is create, we've got base and table, and we've got mapping columns and everything like that. It's all laid out very easily for you. You can just select, drag and drop. But underneath all that, what's going on is we're sending a post request to something like http://api.airtable.ai or something like that. And specifically, we're pointing to create record, for example, and then we've got to authenticate in using a generic credential type or something like that. Let's get into underneath this Airtable node, what's actually going on. So how you start to understand where to send data to and how you should structure these requests. You'll get into the documentation of these softwares, and most online web applications like Airtable have API documentation. Now this looks very, very daunting, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you straight through how to easily navigate resources like this and design your own API requests. So typically you'll see an API documentation like this under APIs. You want to look at all the API integrations that you can do with Airtable, and specifically we're looking for creating a record. So that's the first place we'll look to. So we want to scroll down, see if we can, maybe it's under managing, maybe not. Airtable records, this looks a bit more like us under record actions, adding, duplicating, and deleting records. This is us. So this is under documentation, Airtable records, record actions. We can see what we can do here. We can add records. We've come over now to the Airtable developers web API, and this looks a bit more easy. So what we want to do is create record similar to what we were doing before. And we'll see here an example of what that request actually looks like. You'll see our endpoint here needs our base ID and the table ID or name. You'll see we need authentication, which is bearer, our API token. We'll need to specify a header and then create records like this. So getting a bit complicated now, but this is essential to understanding how all these nodes operate behind the scenes. And I'm going to continue going through this, and I'm going to fully create an HTTP API request to Airtable to showcase and let you understand really what's going on behind all of these nodes. Not just the Airtable one, but a lot of these nodes are wrappers for API requests. And when you understand that, you can start to understand errors, and you can start to understand why things aren't working, why you need to structure data in a certain way, and how to better format data previously to send to those external platforms. Now, I might speed run this a bit, but if you're watching carefully, you'll understand what I'm doing here, and of course, I'll walk you through it. So I'm on the documentation page for Airtable. We know we need this as a header or an endpoint that we can point to. So if I copy this, heading over to n8n, we'll see our URL is this, api.airtable.com v01, and these curly braces are what values we need, so we can delete those and we'll populate them. So we need our base ID, And I know where to find that. If I go to our example CRM, our base is called example CRM and our tables contact. To get the base, I know from experience that it's app B and then a bunch of numbers and characters. I can copy this, head back to n8n, paste that in like so, and then we need our table name. We can go back over to Airtable and it's put quite simple, TBL, copy that, paste that in like so. And authentication, if I go back here, we're using a header as authentication, 2 headers, so authorization bearer, our token, and then content type, application.json. So what I can do here is send headers and the header, authorization. I can tab value, bearer, space, our token, and we had got that before to populate our Airtable node. I can copy this token, come back to n8n, paste it in like so, and then I can add a parameter. We know the second header we need is content type. I can copy that. The name is content type. And the value is application/JSON. Copy that. Cool. Now we're starting to lay out our HTTP request. Now what I can do is send body. We know we need to send a body because it's data, and the data has to be structured in this way where we have a records array and then our column values here. So what I could do is potentially copy all of this and we'll rename them for our specific table. But I'll copy that, we'll send body, and what we can do here is JSON, specify the body. We can either use fields, name and value pairs, or I can use JSON. And I can expand this in the bottom right and paste that in like so. Oop, can restructure. Now, the records I want to add here, we know the fields. Okay, we've got fields, name, number, transcript, status, and assignee. That I know. Okay, so I can add them, name, number, transcript we've got, and I'm just going to keep referencing this. We've got status, so I need to add a new one, status. Leave that blank for now, and then I've got also assignee. Leave that blank also, and no comma for the last one. Transcript is string, comma that. Okay, now I need to close out all these open stuff, so I can close that bracket, I can close that, and I can close that. Oh, and I'm missing one, probably close that. There we go. Now, we're going to create a record, and specifically those records have field, name, number, transcript, status, assignee. I'm going to make them all blank here so that we can pass in these variables. And go out of this. Cool, cool, cool. Okay. And there we have it. We've basically just replicated that create record node using a raw HTTP request. And this is what's happening underneath that node. If I exit out of this, and I might duplicate this, get rid of old mate down here. And our webhook is receiving name and number in this instance. So if I pin that data and populate our body with the name, so if I pause in that, I might expand that. So I'll pause in the name and the number, leave transcript as blank. Status, we know if the transcript doesn't exist, is a failed call, and it needs to be the exact spelling of this. We can exit out of that. if I save that, and let's delete all these records that we have here. Now, if I test workflow, fingers crossed, we'll get an error, perfect. You'll see your request is invalid, and could not be processed by the service. Now, it seems like we cannot have any blank fields, so we can delete these assignee ones we're definitely not populating, transcript, where we can just add proper data into them, save that, test workflow, and there we go. So now you'll see here, the record had been populated. On the flip hand side of that, if the status or transcript does exist, and what I'll have to do here is unpin this data, and let's test this step, right click test step, come back over to here, and we'll put in a transcript. And we'll put in whatever. We'll send that over. Now we have data in, pin that data. See, we have our transcript here. So therefore it will go up the true path because we have a condition here where transcript exists. Now we can come in here and I'll need to disconnect this path so it doesn't execute, or I can just test workflow. That obviously wouldn't work because we hadn't populated these fields down here. So I can turn that into an expression, head down here, expand, and fields. Now I can use name. Now I can use number. Now I can use the transcript. And now I can put the status as called, and I can leave the assignee out, deleting the last comma there. Head out of this, save. Now testing workflow, and look at that. Perfect. So I was able to replicate quite accurately what is happening on an underlying level when it comes to creating these nodes that are sending data out or receiving data in from external softwares or platforms. So these HTTP requests are Airtable create record. They operate the exact same way as the node itself. But to showcase the underworkings of them, I had done it this way to give you a better and more rich understanding of really what's happening in n8n and even these other workflow automation platforms like Make. Each node at its core, when you're really calling in different platforms, for example, all these different ones are HTTP or API requests happening. So now that you have an understanding and a deeper understanding of HTTP and API and webhooks, we can start to bring together the ideas in the first lesson of moving data around and sending data out, and then this second lesson of receiving data in, transforming and sending data back in, those two sides of the equation. So triggering something internally that would determine triggering a call or sending data externally, and then on the flip hand side of that, receiving results from that data and then bring it back in your ecosystem, doing some processing and then sending it to your CRM, for example. When you understand those two sides of the equation, you can start to accurately and effectively build out excellent workflows when it comes to AI voice agents and the automations and underlying logic behind everything like that. And this works not just to create a call and receive end of call data, but also execute tools, execute, server-side events, status updates during a call, failed calls, Twilio events, and everything like that. It all stems from these two ideas of a trigger processing and transforming data, sending it to an external source like your voice agents, and then receiving events from your voice agent and handling those events, transforming the data, and then updating a CRM or a place to reflect those changes. That's really the crux of the underlying logics between good and bad voice agents. Now in this one, we went through API requests, CRMs, and so forth, webhooks, everything like that. Let's go ahead and save this, and you can save this, but for now, let's just delete everything. Welcome to the third part of a three-part series, n8n for voice AI. In this one, we're going to be going through building real-world application workflow automations when it comes to voice AI agents. So today we'll be able to design workflows that support our AI voice agents in real-world calling scenarios. So we'll go through some complex theories like handling time zones and scheduling, designing our workflows around AI call outcomes, so sifting through transcripts, as well as integrating with tools like Twilio, cal.com, and CRMs being the most important here. So welcome to number 3 of a 3-part series in n8n automation for voice AI. In the first 2 parts, we were really going through these ideas of first getting the basics down, navigating n8n, how to transform data and different types of triggers and everything like that. The second was getting a bit familiar with these ideas of webhooks and APIs and understanding the underlying logic between a lot of these on-app events nodes and things like that, really just being a wrapper for an API. Now in this one, we're going to put that all together and build a real caller using VAPI as our external platform and n8n as our logic processor. And we're going to be using the stack that we've sort of tied together in the first 2 lessons, that being Airtable as a CRM and an n8n to collect some data, process some data to distribute. So if you're not familiar with VAPI, I recommend checking out my channel and starting to get an understanding of this software in particular. Put simply, VAPI is a voice orchestration layer which handles this idea of merging the 3 components of a voice agent: transcription, so transcribing my speech into text, passing that into an LLM, and then taking the LLM inferencing output back into speech, synthesized. And this platform does a great job on bringing all that together where you can set up your own agent. In particular, we're using Riley here. So this is going to be Wellness Partners, a scheduling assistant. How may I help you today? And we've got a system prompt here that understands its role, its task, qualifying the lead, and then booking an appointment. Okay, but to really give you a better understanding of what's happening here, and this is going to sound funny, but pretty much everything on the internet is a wrapper of underlying logic and tools, and really this dashboard, even in VAPI, is a wrapper on side of their API framework. And to see that, we'll go into the docs here, API reference, and you can see a variety of different endpoints that we can tap into to start creating a call, and to create an assistant, get a phone number, everything like that. Okay, so let's begin. We know on the n8n side, we want to somehow distribute a call to this Riley assistant, and then we're going to talk to a user, which will be myself, and then we're going to want to process what happens during that call or during the end of the call, and then reflect that on a CRM. That's really the basis of what we're creating today. And this is going to be quite advanced in that the prerequisites for this particular tutorial is that you know how VAPI works, you know how tools work, and you know how end of call reporting works. And you had watched my previous 2 sessions on n8n to understand this idea of a trigger, as well as understanding the idea of sending data or receiving data from an external source and then processing that data to display on a dashboard or display on a CRM. And today we'll be using Airtable as our CRM. So heading back into n8n, what do we do when we need to trigger something and distribute a call. Firstly, we need to define the trigger. And before we were using a manual trigger, but this one we're going to use on schedule, and we can use any one of these and get a bit creative with it. Maybe we'll use on form submission perhaps, and I think that's probably going to be the best one in this example. So we'll go ahead and click on form submission. Using the on form submission trigger here, we'll be given a form URL. If I copy that, you'll see in a new tab, the form trigger isn't listening yet because we haven't mapped out any of this. We'll leave authentication blank. The form title is going to be receive a call. This is a form to receive a call. Okay, now we can start to map out the form elements, so what data we're wanting to collect when the form is submitted. And firstly, we want to specify field name 1, and we want to collect the name. Enter your name as a placeholder. That is going to be required. We're going to add a new one, number. What is your number? This is going to be also a required field, and we could change the element type here. So whether it's a number, password, text area, drop-down list, date, everything like that, we'll keep it as text for now. And then that's pretty much it. We're going to collect the name and number. And when that form is submitted, that name and number is going to come into our n8n ecosystem. So we'll test that step, head back over to our form here, and look at this. Receive a call. This is the form we just created. I'm going to submit my name and my number. Submit. Form submitted. Your response has been recorded. If I go back to n8n, you'll see the output there includes our name and number, as well as the submitted at time and the form mode. So this will either be test or production. I'm going to go ahead and correct that number spelling there. Now, we can pin this output like we were doing previously. And now we have a trigger. So this workflow is going to trigger when our form is submitted. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the name and number, and we're going to validate that the number actually exists. Again, this idea of data transformation and cleansing and things like that. So we're going to add a set fields, and we're going to add the name. We'll drag in our name, and we're going to add another field, number. Number. And the value here is going to be the number. They're both string values for now. And we're going to admit the submitted at and form mode here. Save that. Command enter to run. And we'll see our two items there, name and number. Now, what we want to do now is use the name and number to distribute a call using our Riley assistant, right? And to do that, we have to use the idea of a post request, specifically submitting an API request to this create call endpoint using our assistant and some customer variables, including a number and the name, okay? So let's go back over to here. We'll hit plus and we'll search up HTTP, make a request. And this method is, you guessed it, post, because we're sending data to that endpoint. We're going to jump back over to the create call, and you'll see here our address here is going to be this. We can copy and put that as our URL. Authentication we'll use in the headers because it specifies that. H, we know it's very similar to what we're doing with Airtable in the previous lesson. So we use authorization and content-type as our headers. And to do that, we can hit send headers. First one, authorization, bearer, space, and we'll add the other header, content-type, and this will be application JSON. Now we need to get our API key to get that from VAPI. You already know if you're watching this under org settings, API keys. I'll go ahead and copy this. Now, once you pasted that in, we're going to send a body. So we need to send a payload, which includes this name and number, to our agent to create a call. And again, we're going to use JSON here. And specifically, it's going to look something like this. So we're going to open, and we'll just jump into the top here. We're going to open this object, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the assistant ID to specify this agent schema. So we can copy this up here, come back over here, and we can open a new object, assistant ID, and paste that in like so, enter. And instead of writing this out, I'll just give a structure here, making it simple. So the assistant ID, we know we can just paste in using our Riley assistant here. And then we're going to use some assistant overrides variable values. This is going to be the customer name. We'll leave that for now. And then we're going to use the customer number and then the phone number ID. So what phone number is the assistant calling from? And if you're familiar with VAPI and my YouTube channel, you'll know how to do this. But to reiterate, we'll go under phone numbers, create a phone number, and we'll use a free VAPI number for now, create. We'll try one of these area codes here. This will activate, but we'll have a phone number ID here. Go ahead and paste in like so. And we'll just go out of this and turn this into an expression. And we'll open that up again. And now we can pass in our name and our number. Perfect. So now what we're doing is we're waiting for a form submission. We're collecting some specific fields, and then we're using those specific fields to distribute a call using our VAPI agent, and there we have it. So we can hit save on that one. Now this will send a call after this number is activated, and we need to put in our number in which we want to receive the call, but note we'll have our name, but note we're passing in some variable values, e.g. the name and the customer number, so maybe we want to personalize it so that the assistant will speak their name. And to do that, because we're passing in that, we can just double curly braces and pass in the name there. Very cool. So publish that one. Cool. Now we're not going to book in an appointment now, but we're going to demonstrate how easy it is to start distributing a call. Now that's set up, all we have to do is just wait for this number. That's been activated. Now we can submit this form with a number, and this will create a call to. So let's test this workflow, and we'll probably want to unpin that data, test workflow, and we'll refresh this page, submit. There we go. And we have a call coming through our soft phone. Hello.
Hi there. Thank you for calling Talk AI. May I have your name, please?
So that call worked. Look at that, guys. So using that core concept of triggering, we're able to distribute a call using an external platform, VAPI, using some of the fields we had set within n8n that we have collected from an external source, a form. So on the flip side of that, what happens when that call is ended and we need to reflect that? So once this is saved, let's head over to personal, and we'll create a new workflow with this idea of that webhook. So if I type up webhook, and we'll use the test URL post, and we copy this webhook, and then we go over to our external platform like VAPI. we can specify under the assistant, under advanced messaging, that our server setting should be sent to this webhook. And we want to send the end of call report only. And again, if you're familiar with VAPI, you'll know what's going on here. I recommend checking out my videos. If you don't, go ahead and we'll publish that. Cool. Now on end of call report, this status is going to be sent to our post URL. So let's go ahead and listen for test events. While that's happening, I'm going to open a new tab with our trigger. And we'll go ahead and open this up. And we'll test that workflow. And while these are both running, we're going to go ahead and submit a form again with our number.
Hi there. May I have your name, please?
We can go ahead and end this call. So we're waiting for the trigger event in there, and it's just come through. We can go ahead and quickly pin this output, and then we can start to use some of this output data, including the transcript, to reflect back on a CRM. So here we go. We can just do a quick set fields, add a field. Let's call this transcript. Then we'll search on our input side because this is pretty large, transcript. And we'll see here, we can use that as a value. Cool. And if I go ahead and test that workflow, you'll see the output includes our transcript, the call we had just had. Now we can take this transcript, update it to our CRM, and of course we're not going to have the name and number in our CRM because on form submission, we're just directly calling the user. So on this side, maybe we want to add these fields into the CRM so we can search that CRM, reference the row number, and then update it with the call outcome or the transcript. So let's do that. So we can use Airtable, create a record using our access token. We can resource record create from list. We'll choose that example CRM from list, contacts, and then we want to add those edit field name and number into our CRM, which we can save. And then on the webhook side, we can use an Airtable, search records, where we're going to search from the list, example CRM, table, from list, contacts, and we're going to add a formula. So we can start to add like this query formula here, where we can say potentially number, and we'll close off that, is equal to our webhook number that we had just called. So let's find customer number. Look at that. And we'll have to put that as an expression. And we'll say number is equal to that number we had just called. Okay, that's good. Now, the result of that. So let's just right-click test this step. We don't have a number. We don't have a number, obviously. We'll have to enable the other one, but we'll search up Airtable, and then we're going to update a record. Again, example CRM from list contacts. And we're going to use the ID to match, but we don't have any input yet because we haven't run this. So let's go ahead and save this. And we'll go ahead and test this workflow. Okay, we're getting some errors here. So it's likely to do with our Airtable. Filtering record is invalid, so we'll probably have to put quotes in here and then put customer and find their number, put it inside the quotes here, and close off that. Okay, let's see if that will work. Number looks correct to me. Save, test that step. There we go, so it was quotations. So when you're referencing this sort of filter query, just put the filter value in quotes. Cool. And this will return obviously a record. There's no output data because it doesn't exist in here. So what we could do is potentially just put in, so what we could probably do here is distribute another call. So our first workflow populates our record with those user details, and then our second workflow is able to update that with the transcript. So what we can do, unpin this data, we'll test that workflow, and then we'll come back to this workflow, we'll test this, head back over to our form, guys, name and our number, submit, we're getting a call, accept.
Ellie, your scheduling assistant, how may I help you today?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you for asking.
We can go ahead and end that call. That updated record worked. Now our number's in here. Now on this end of call report, and we're jumping around here so you gotta stay with me. When the call, end of call report data is received, we'll set the number, search the record using that number, and then update the record. But we haven't fully mapped out this yet. And we've received our end of call report. It was able to locate that number where we get the ID, which we can now use to use the ID as a match, put the name, the number, and obviously the transcript, and then we'll put the status as called, save, and we'll use this data just as example here. Now you'll see our record here, I'll just clean this up a bit. The record here is the one what was just called, and now we're updating that to reflect those changes. And there we have it. So a real use case on creating n8n automations for voice AI. So we had the trigger side and the end of call report side. And I've got a variety of videos that handle time zones, scheduling appointments, and everything in between when it comes to creating sound and application ready AI voice agents. But now we've got the fundamentals down when working with APIs, webhooks, triggers, data transformation, and data output handling. We are ready to create those production ready voice agents. Thank you all for watching. All right, guys, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and comment below. If you are looking to stay ahead of the AI voice curve, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I aim to upload weekly, but that is it for today. Until next week.